much sunshine as we do get the raindrops, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. This is such an important subject and will resonate with so many of us. Now, a lady from Bath whose mother died during lockdown is calling for a new law to be passed to ensure that vulnerable people in care are not left without access to a family member should another pandemic ever occur. Hazel Leech, who's from Widcombe in Bath, spoke in Parliament this week to tell her emotional story of how her family weren't allowed to visit her mum and to urge MPs to make sure it just can't happen again. Well, I'm very pleased to say Hazel is with us in the studio now. Good morning to you, Hazel.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me in today.
Yeah, no, it's just such an important thing. And as I say, I think it will resonate with so many people. We'll get to what happened with your mum, and we know you were unable to see it. What happened on Tuesday when you were there?
Well, we went to Parliament. I'm part of a campaign group called Rights for Residents, which was formed in desperation during the pandemic when so many of us were locked out. And I was there to talk to a group of MPs from all the parties before a 10-minute rule bill was introduced to Parliament by Dan Carden, who's a Labour MP for Liverpool Waltham. And I was there to talk about my own experience, the impact of COVID restrictions on my mum Barbara and our immediate family. And there were many MPs present who heard what I had to say, and also the actress Ruthie Henshaw. Mm-hmm. And the law we're trying to get through Parliament is called Gloria's Law, because Ruthie's mother was also in care. Ruthie had to watch her mum through a glass window with dementia fade away, and she was only allowed in at the end. So the law's named after Ruthie's mum. And then after we'd spoken, Ruthie and myself and Di from Rights for Residents as well, we then went up into watch the MPs, and Dan Carden introduced this 10-minute rule bill, which is basically Gloria's Law. The proper name is the Care Supporters Bill. And what he put through, and actually was unanimously accepted, which is just so fantastic.
And that's cross-party, isn't it?
That's totally cross-party, yeah. And all the MPs get it, because so many of them have had these horrible situations themselves. And so we watched that go through, and then it's amazingly, because you fight and you fight, and then suddenly, it's happened, and we've been given a second reading. It passed unanimously, and we've been given a second reading in November.
So you've got a lot of hope there, haven't you?
We've got a lot of hope, but there's still a lot we can do, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
Your mum, your situation that you found yourself in, and I know it's hard to condense this, but basically you found yourself unable to help her.
Yes, that's right. So it's a unique story, but it will resonate with so many listeners up and down the country, and we're fighting for all of them, really. And you wouldn't have believed before the pandemic that something like this could have happened in this day and age, and we've got to put it in law so it doesn't happen again. Mum was independent until she was 95. She went into care, but the deal was we'd take her out on jaunts and give her a good time, and that happened. And then COVID struck. Initially, we were really pleased she'd be safe. And then the sort of realisation dawned that we couldn't have access to her. She was very deaf, and I was forever sorting out her hearing aids. They were lost in week 1, so she was pretty well deaf throughout the whole lockdown period. We had to book weekly calls, which staff had to help with, because we FaceTime her. And of course,
if she couldn't hear you...
Well, absolutely.
That was useless, wasn't it?
The care home staff are really caring, but they can't replace a loved one who knows what makes somebody tick. All activities ceased in the home. She was bored out of her mind, often incarcerated in her room, didn't get it because... she didn't realise what was going on in the outside world. She couldn't really follow the news properly. And then she rang me week 6, told me I'd abandoned her, that we must get on with our own lives, and she'd had enough. And I was powerless. There was nothing I could do. Care home, they knew what had happened. They didn't contact me about her mental health. And a week later, she stopped taking medication, ended up in hospital, and the doctor rang me. It was so difficult.
So you this lack of access caused huge problems, a huge upset.
Yes.
And to get that phone call from your mum, awful.
I think it was the real low point, actually.
Yeah. But I'm sure you also do understand that it was really difficult times and nobody quite knew what to do.
Absolutely. We didn't know how long it was going to go on. I think the experts had to do this to start with, but in the longer term, they weren't looking at the impact of lockdown on mental health, particularly for those who depended on their loved ones for interaction. Those with dementia. My mum didn't have dementia, but she was, she was 90, elderly.
Yeah.
And then, we had window visits, but she couldn't see me because she was deaf. There was partitions with microphones. Mum didn't get it, and she said, "I've had enough of this," and she walked away from. And that was our.
That was your slot gone.
That was the slot gone for the week. I must have been such a pain to the care home because I was trying so hard to get round it in any way I could, and they. Every care provider seemed to be making up their own rules around visiting. That's the point with guidance, and no one was held accountable for it.
So what you are trying to do is make sure that, God forbid, that another pandemic happens or anything like this, in care homes and in hospitals, you want change, don't you?
Absolutely. We want Gloria's Law, which, as I said, was Care Supporters Bill, which would mean that...
How can you stop this happening again? What would Gloria's bill do? What law do?
This bill would give at least one named essential care supporter the right to visit their loved ones in a care or health setting, taking the same precautions as required at that time as the care staff.
Okay, and that's as simple as that, really.
Reasonable, yes.
But again. If we get into this situation again, we will have learnt a lot of lessons.
Yes.
But sometimes, keeping people separate might still be the thing.
Then, this is why we need this law. One person, I think, would make all the difference, and we've got to push for that.
Yeah. How much support have you had?
Well, the MPs, amazingly, it's cross-party, the support.
Not just from the MPs, but around the country.
Well, I think anyone who hears what we're saying thinks absolutely everyone knows someone who's got a relative or a young person. I mean, this happened to young children in care as well. And imagine not being able to see your disabled child who's in care. It's just heartbreaking what's happened. It's inhumane, actually, and I'm sure it breaks.
It breaks people. It breaks the family, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's also against their human rights, I would say.
Yeah. How convinced are you that this actually will happen?
Well, as I say, it's going to
You've got November's the next time.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if our listeners today write in to their MPs, especially the Conservative ones, I think we have cross-party support, I keep saying, but we have to push it past the line, and the government has it within its gift to bring this forward. There'll be a general election next year. In fact, one of the ministers said to Helen Wheatley, the care minister, on Tuesday, that she could do something about it and bring it forward. So, what's stopping the government doing that? So if our listeners today could write in and say, please, we support this bill wholeheartedly, please bring this bill forward, then it could happen sooner rather than later.
What do you think your mum would think about this?
I think that she would be really proud, but I also think that she'd be expecting me to do this, actually. So we're doing it on their behalf, on behalf of all those who didn't have a voice.
I mean, I can tell the passion about this in your voice and in your demeanour. How much of a toll has this taken on you?
It was huge at the time. I think we were distraught, permanently distraught and on edge, because we just knew what she was going through, and it was horrible, absolutely horrible. That year, I mean, in many ways, COVID was, lockdown was fine for me. I had a big garden and I could go out cycling, but all the time, what my mum couldn't do was on my mind. And then even when society opened up, they were still locked up. And the restrictions were still so great all the way to when she died, and COVID cases started rising again, and we had to make that appalling choice. Should we let her go into hospital where she would die and we wouldn't be able to see her because she was quite frail? Or do we accept end-of-life care? She may have survived, but, or we decided on end-of-life care, and we gave her 2 weeks, and that's how long it took to pass. But we were with her, and that time was so precious. And I wouldn't want anyone to go through what we went through, and that's why I'm here today.
I'm sure many people at home will be saying thank you for trying to make sure that this doesn't never happen again. But you would like people, as you say, to write to MPs and make sure that people know that it's being supported.
Yeah, and our Bath MP, Vera Hobhouse, has already endorsed it, said she's 100% behind it.
Okay, well, lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry out of such sadness has come such a groundswell of, support for something that is really important.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to talk to you. And that is Hazel Leech from Wickham, talking very passionately, as you have done, about what happened to her experience and how we can change things.
It's the age of revolution.